Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your time this evening. I welcome you to this 2020-21 Annual Budget Committee of Council meeting. We have in attendance for the meeting this evening Councillors Conlon, Chen, Piccinini, Haynes, Goff, Zafiropoulos and Kleinert. And we have an apology this evening from Councillor Galbally. And obviously I'm here as Councillor McLeish. And we have in attendance also the CEO, Andrew Day. Councillors, item 2 on the agenda is conflict of interest. Do any councillors have a conflict of interest that they wish to declare at this time? I'm seeing no inclination for everyone saying no to that, so I'll accept that there are no conflicts of interest. Item 3 on the agenda is the receipt of public submissions for the 2020 and 21 annual budget, incorporating the 4-year strategic resource plan 20 to 24. There is a report available for this, councillors, and the report is attached. To the agenda. Item 3 is the receipt of public submissions for said report, councillors. The recommendation available before us is that the submissions on the draft 2021 annual budget incorporating the 4-year strategic resource plan 2020 to 24 be received and be considered by the committee. Do I have a mover for that particular recommendation? I'll need to hear from you, councillor. I see a hand at Councillor Conlon. Thank you.
I'm happy to move the recommendation as on the paper.
Thank you, councillor. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Goff. Those for? Thank you, councillors. That's unanimous. We can now hear from the submitters that we have before us here this evening. We have 3 submitters who are making verbal presentations to the meeting, which is in support of their written submissions. As you're aware, you have all of the written submissions provided to you in the report from the officers. The first submitter we have for this evening is John Sheedy. John is presenting on behalf of the Applewoods Residents Committee. It's submission 20-12 on page 1 of the attachment. John has joined us on the line. He's just appeared on the screen. So he's coming in by phone. So you should all hear John when he presents. Welcome, John. Thank you for joining us here this evening. We do appreciate it. I'll turn the floor over to you for 5 minutes to make your presentation.
Thank you. Yes, we're in unusual times and we appreciate the opportunity afforded by Council to enable us to speak in support of our submission. The draft 2020-21 budget was approved without any differential rating, which provides no rate relief to retirement village residents, while who they accept the need to pay council rates only want to pay what is their fair share. The council calls for equity for ratepayers, but this must surely also include retirement village residents. The current rating strategy remains unfair to retirement village residents who continue to bear a disproportionate share of the rate burden. We want councillors to understand the rationale behind our request for a differential rate, which is not a call for a user pays system. The general rate for all ratepayers contains an embedded contribution towards the cost to maintain council services and infrastructure facilities, which are delivered to the boundary of all rateable properties, except for retirement village properties. Retirement villages are therefore not treated equally with other ratepayers, as council infrastructure services stop at the village boundary and do not extend to the boundary of each individually rated village property. Village resident ratepayers do not own the roads, footpaths, drains, streets and lighting, etc., which is the case with other strata and gated communities. However, we pay for the upkeep of this infrastructure as well as paying full rates, which would normally cover these costs up to the boundary of each individually rated property. And this represents a grossly unfair duplication of costs to village residents, which is neither fair nor equitable. A primary objection quoted against the granting of a differential rate is that other ratepayers would need to pay more. However, if council delivered the full infrastructure facilities direct to retirement village properties on the same basis as other ratepayers, then the resultant higher maintenance cost to council would require an across-the-board increase in rates. In essence, retirement village residents, ratepayers, currently effectively subsidise other ratepayers by not having to pay these higher rates, and this equates to around $4.50 per annum per ratepayer. The cost of a 25% differential rate is also around $4.50 per annum per ratepayer. So given the current subsidy, there is really no additional cost to other ratepayers. Council accepts there is a savings to the substantial cost from not having to maintain village infrastructure, which cost is borne by village residents. And we believe this saving should be recognised by lower rates to remove the unfair duplication of costs. It is this duplication which is a key reason, but not the sole one, why a 25% differential rate should be introduced. A frequently expressed concern is that differential rating will create a precedent. This is not the case. Retirement villages are clearly defined in legislation, and this legally distinguishes them from all other forms of housing. So the granting of a differential rate will not create a precedent for others to follow. The council argues against a user pay system, saying it's impossible to measure individual levels of access and consumption across the full range of council services. But as pointed out earlier, this is not the basis of our submission. While not a precise measure, the 25% differential rate sought has been validated using the empirical evidence extracted from a detailed analysis of the 2017-18 budget on the cost savings for council not having to maintain village infrastructure. And this cost saving would be similar on today's figures. We accept that rates are a property tax and not a consumption tax or a fee for service. But this should not preclude differential rating, which is specifically provided for in the Act and is promoted as best practice in the ministerial guidelines which were issued to address rating disparities for retirement villages. The statement that differential rating would be confusing is quite wrong. Differential rates have been used by council in the past, so the solution to correct the current injustice would not create any confusion, and so this statement should no longer be used. We also challenge the comment that it would be complex to administer, as it would only require a simple once-only software change to apply a differential rate to what are already identified retirement village properties. If it were not for retirement villages providing their own services and facilities, many similar council ones would be subjected to increased demand and would require expansion at additional cost to council. It is this combination of arguments that form the basis of our submission, warranting reduced rates for retirement villages. The budget states that despite rate capping constraints, council will remain in a sound financial position and forecast continuance of annual surpluses to improve the future financial sustainability, which would not be impacted by a 25% differential rate. While we are convinced that a differential rate is the most efficient and effective way to address the issue of being double-dipped, we remain open to any alternative proposal from council, such as a direct grant, which is used by some other councils, or any other arrangements that would provide an equivalent dollar-level benefit to the satisfaction of Applewood residents. We urge councillors to consider the valid and sound arguments presented in our submission and exercise the prerogative to amend the budget to provide for a 25% differential rate for retirement village properties. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sheedy, for your submission. Councillors, the floor is open to any questions that you may want to ask of Mr. Sheedy in respect of his submission. I don't see anyone indicating they wish to ask a question. So, Mr. Sheedy, I did have a question myself. So, looking at the census data about our city, it tells me that about 21% of our population are over 65 years of age, and that's about 24,000 people. So they're either of pension or retirement age. Obviously, not all of those are retired, but that's a significant portion of our population. that's not a population that we can identify, and we aren't in a position, therefore, to offer that group anything other than the pensioner rebate that we already offer on rates. So your argument seems to be that because we can identify, in part your argument is because we can identify this particular constituency, that this group of retired people are deserving of a discount when the 24,000 other retired residents are not. How do we deal with that inequity?
We're not arguing that as retirees that we should receive a discount on our rates. We're arguing that we are double dipped because those 21% of the 65 plus, which I think you said was 24,000 people, council services are delivered to the boundaries of their properties, but they are not delivered to the boundaries of retirement village properties.
Yeah, I'm afraid I don't agree with that assessment. Council services are provided right across the municipality. We provide maternal and child health care, kindergartens, libraries, a vast array of services, a vast array of infrastructure that in total provides drainage to the city, not in one particular part. The entire infrastructure provides that drainage. People use council services across their entire lifespan. Some people use childcare, some people use kindergartens, some people use libraries. It isn't a user pays model. People pay their rates and receive access to council services at whatever stage in life they are at. You're suggesting to us that this particular group of residents should get a discount because of the type of accommodation they have, in part, amongst other factors. But that's not how council rates are levied on the entire rest of the population. I can't see the distinction when services are provided generically around our community based on their residence and their need, and that is it.
We're not arguing on a type of accommodation. We're simply saying that the roads, gutters, drainage, etc., within the village are maintained by us, and that's maintained for other ratepayers right to the boundary of their property. That's the argument that we are trying to make.
Which is no different to any apartment building in the city. Anyway, thank you, Mr. Sheedy. I do appreciate your submission.
Okay.
It's well argued, as always, and very well put, as always. When we do appreciate hearing your view.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Okay, councillors, we now have another submission number 20-145. It is on page 6 of the attachment. The submission is from James Bishop. James has just joined us on the conference call. James, you have the floor. All the councillors are in the meeting and are able to hear you.
Thank you, Paul, and nice to see all your smiling faces. I would just obviously put it in writing, but I dislike seeing where we're having lots of ongoing or re-incurring costs. Timber is one of my passions. I love it to bits, but when I look across the road in the park with all the timber that's been replaced over the last 20 years that I've been here, I look at it occurring again and again, and I'm watching some very cool technology from Replast being used in plastic recycling and posts that are going to last as long as our bins or longer, and removing the significant costs of repair, painting and replacement of all the timber which has out in the sunshine degrades very quickly and costs us and our budget quite significant amounts quite clearly. I did put on the paper as well about my love of marathons. Some of you might know I had a huge accident about 12 months ago. I can't run quite yet, but I did paddle down the Yarra River and run into our lovely Councillor Michelle at the end of it, and also rode around the entire of the track just the other day and loved it. Thank you. It's fantastic, apart from the road crossings, which terrify me at times. But we find again that there's been significant amounts of timber put in the walkways, boardways, and tracks that have been recently installed, which I find a little bit disappointing, because they're in the same category that will require ongoing maintenance, ongoing replacements. And there were patches of them that have been installed 5 years ago, 10 years ago, which are already unusable down near Petty's apple orchards. So it would be appreciated if that could be considered by the council to try and remove the reoccurring costs by using some of the innovative products that are now available, which also feed into our waste environment by recycling the plastics from our own city to be reused in our city to hopefully also save us some costs. I really do enjoy my running, so I'd love if you guys could consider putting a marathon around the track. I might be running by that stage, so I'd love to do it. But we see tens of thousands of people every time I run, whether it's in Shepparton, Traralgon, Sydney, Lilydale, Melbourne Marathon, Sydney Marathons. The economic benefit for our community, if we were to have that type of event, and we have got such beautiful environment to have that type of event, that I strongly support you guys to consider what you've already created in the purpose-built 42-kilometre track to be used for a marathon. 5 minutes is not a long time, so I'm going to keep going quickly. Thank you for all the hard work you do. I really do mean that, because quite clearly sometimes some of us get grumpy with some things. For the most part, I think the council is really well run and very appreciated with all the hard work that everybody does, from your staff, your management, your executives. I have noted over the last 5 years very clear exceptions on 1 or 2 occasions where evidence was presented to councillor, to quite a number of you that are in front of me now, which was clearly incorrect, clearly faulty. And I find it quite amazing that we didn't have some checks and balances in place to where we're being told what is clearly not true or not correct. Might be an opinion or a desire, but presented as evidence, not being picked up by the council. And I felt that a well-governed council requires some checks and balances to ensure that the evidence presented to you is in fact valid and correct, and particularly where it's coming from your executive or management, that there are balances and checks put in place to ensure that you have not been misinformed and our community is served poorly where that checks and balances are not put in place. I'm going to finish now because I don't want to take up too much of your time, and I'm sure you guys have got other things that you need to consider, and thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. Do appreciate your submission. Councillors, do any of you have any questions of Mr. Bishop on his submission? Councillor Goff.
Yeah, interested in what you're saying, James, Mr. Bishop. What can you be more specific? Because it's just a general statement that you've made. Is there a particular issue that you believe that you don't agree with the point of view?
Sure, Jeff. You were in the room when someone told you that the parking was being enforced correctly in Jackson Court at appropriate levels, where an FOI application that I put in place found that there was 2 or 3 parking infringements given in the 3-hour parking zones in Jackson Court over a 12-month period, with hundreds of parking infringements given in the 30-minute parking zones. at that point, we had upwards of 200 tradesmen and women parked in Jackson Court in the 2 and 3 hour parking zones for perhaps 6 months of the year for 8 hours of each day. The impact of that on the traders, some of whom told me they lost tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars, resulted specifically in several people I know losing their jobs. And they were lovely people that worked in the Greek Deli in Jackson Court and some of the other businesses there. The council's own data showed that the parking officers, whilst they were trying, were not being effective in the controls that they were putting in place. And again, I appreciate that we've now got parking sensors, etc., put in place, and that's appreciated again. But one of the managers in the council stood in front of a council meeting and stated that his staff were doing an effective job, where the evidence the council had in front of them showed quite the contrary. The video evidence of all the cars parked there for multiple hours on multiple occasions wasn't considered and definitely did not support the council's evidence that you only issued 3 parking tickets, which was a well-known issue and a major complaint by many people.
Thank you. Are there any other questions of Mr. Bishop? Okay, there are no further questions, Mr. Bishop. Thank you so much for your presentation and for the constructive feedback you've given us. We do appreciate it, and we will take it on board.
Thank you.
We'll now move on to the last submission, councillors, which is Mr. Frank Freshy. It's submission sub 20-146. It's on page 7 of the attachment. Mr. Freshy is just joining us and James is just dropping out of the call.
Hello, everybody.
Welcome, Mr. Freshy. We can all hear you, so please, if you'd care to proceed with your presentation.
Thank you very much. Am I speaking clearly enough for you?
Certainly, it's crystal clear.
Okay, great. Let me start firstly with a correction, an error that I made in my submission that I don't know how I made the typo, but anyway, it was in relation to 1 FTE per 168 ratepayers is what I had meant to say or type in, but I suspect I may have made a mistake with my fingers, which happens quite often. Thanks very much for this opportunity. And again, let me congratulate the council and the workers involved in the plan here that I'm commenting on. And to be honest, given that the time that really is allocated, I'm not going to cover the size of the governed council or the governance bill, but I would like to touch on a couple of things to do with the plan in relation to the investment for resilient environment, and then sort of an association between that and the vibrant, prosperous economy section that's referred to. So if I may, with your permission, I'd just like to make a comment about when I read the investment for resilient environment, it sort of seemed that the budget there was probably a little bit low, or maybe, if I dare say, inadequate, that given the amount of money that was going to be spent for that particular education and raising awareness, as I understood it, it was going to be something like 50 programs for 3,000 people mainly. That sort of funding, which works out probably about $18 per ratepayer, didn't seem adequate to cover what I think is missing in a resilient environment consideration. And that is, I found no climate change statement or mitigation or adaptation in the plan, nor could I identify any actions with any allocated funding for climate change in the budget. So if that's really one of the considerations, and I had a question, therefore, question one was, what is the Manningham City Council's plan to address the impacts of climate change, given that the Victorian state carbon emission targets and the devastating effects that are being experienced right now, maybe luckily not bushfires so much in Manningham, but other aspects that are associated with climate change. That is one of the questions or one of the concerns I have that doesn't appear to be in the plan. So that's the first part, or the first question. The other one is related to the resilient environment and the vibrant, prosperous economy. And there I wanted to refer to the Department of Environment, Land, Water, the strategy around the Birrarung corridor that is really centred around sustainable stewardship of the river and its natural landscape, and also incorporating Indigenous culture and Indigenous involvement in the maintenance of this natural landscape, but also the concept of Heidi art, the sports and entertainment facilities, into an integrated precinct that really I think is a great concept and a great idea. And I was wondering, I couldn't find anything that in the plan that showed any investment that would link Manningham with this DELP strategy. It makes a lot of sense that in my view would make a lot of sense to hook into that and to develop the precinct, especially as the Northeast Link project works progress. So my second question is, what's the Manningham City Council's vision for enhancing local community amenity and attracting metropolitan visitors to this precinct within the Manningham City Council's strategic plan? They're the two questions I have. I wonder if you could find some response to that.
They're complex questions that you've asked, and it's not really a great forum for us to advise on answers on those, given we're looking at the budget overall. However, I can tell you that from an environment perspective, we are in the throes of preparing an environment action plan, which is going to lay out our goals and objectives in climate mitigation, our climate response plan, in essence. I'm probably not using the correct terminology, but it's being prepared at the moment. Our existing plan is just about to expire, and that laid out all of the actions that the council would take in response to climate change. And we've done quite well in achieving the milestones under that, such as achieving our greenhouse gas reductions target over the period of the timeline that we set, the decade that we set the plan for. And a whole new suite of goals are going to be set shortly in the next action plan, which will be coming, I believe, to this council in the next couple of months.
Oh, okay.
CEO can shake his head. I think that's correct. I think I've got that timing correct. So we are indeed preparing a response, and we actually relatively recently released a report which provided a community update on the progress we've made on our climate action goals. That came to council just a couple of months ago, and I'm sure we would be able to get you a copy of that, which will give you some semblance of what it is that we're doing. It is something that's actually embedded across the organisation rather than trying to specifically carve it out. Because it's about trying to make sure the organisation acts rather than focusing on a specific budget line item, because it's a very distributed organisation with a vast array of services. And if you bring it together in one budget item, it actually doesn't get the traction. You actually have to motivate the organisation. So, in the last 4 years, we've achieved things like, I think practically every single street light in the council has been converted to LED. That's had a bottom line impact on our budget, but it's also had a significant impact on the greenhouse gas emissions from the council, and really helped to drive down the emissions from the council as a business. we've shifted, I think it's 15% of the fleet's already been shifted to hybrid vehicles, and that's happened in the last 2 years. So there is action underway, and I think if you look at that sustainability report, which will get you a copy, that should help address to some extent that concern, but we would welcome feedback and input on that. And when we release the new action plan, it will go out for public comment, and we would encourage you to have a look at that and provide us your input, because we think the community can really help us enrich that plan and improve the goals that we can deliver as a council.
Oh, great. I'm pleased to hear that there is. Is that the current one on the website at all? The first one you mentioned?
It should be.
Okay, I'll have a look in your. I didn't see it, but that doesn't mean it's not there. Okay, I'll have a look at that.
And it doesn't mean it is there either. It should be, but if it isn't, we will get a copy for you.
I'd appreciate that. That'd be great. That would have mitigated this question. Although I must admit, I was looking for a budgetary item for funding in there, but I didn't see it. But I can understand now why. Thanks for explaining that. Is there any comment?
The street lighting one was a classic one in that it was in the capital works budget.
Okay, thank you. What about the second point that I raised about the combination of the environment and the economy, and linking in with the DELP strategy for Birrarung Corridor?
Right.
And
well, again, we haven't put aside a specific budget for that action, but I know even as we speak, we are very actively pursuing within the outcomes, for example, of the North East Link project, to resolve the future of the land that is north of Templestowe Road, to actually have the public acquisition overlays that exist over some of those properties exercised so that they can come back to public parkland. We are looking to have the golf driving range, for example, become soccer facilities, and that there'll be some remediation of some of the environmental pollution that happens through stormwater in that precinct as a result of that particular development. We're seeking to resolve the tenure of the HM Claus seed farm that exists within that precinct. And we'll be making some very detailed submissions to both the Delwood Yarra River Strategic River Precinct Plan that's just been released. We'll be making a very detailed submission, I expect, to that particular matter. And we're also working hard on the Bulleen Land Use Framework, which will also inform the outcomes for the parkland in that precinct, running all the way from Heide through to Finns Reserve. So I know in the 8 years that I've been on council, we've been working in the background very hard on resolving that precinct in a number of ways. We've made a submission to the planning minister prior to even the North East Link project to try and get all of that land resolved and returned to public open space so that we can then get the walking trails put in along the river corridor and make the linkages along the river. We're even trying to get a bridge across the Yarra down near Heide to create a pedestrian and cycling linkage into the main Yarra Trail and get the linkages to the railway station in Heidelberg. So there's a lot going on, but it's not a budgeted line item because it's an advocacy effort across a whole range of sectors of our organisation to resolving a very complex piece of public land that we want to see become a first-class parkland precinct and public. I can't even get the word right now. It becomes good public land and available for the community.
Look, I am aware, I must admit, of many of the topics you touched on, many of the properties and the transition of those to sporting facilities. I'm well aware of those and been involved in those. And I've also been involved with the DELP program for this corridor. So I've also provided inputs into their strategic plan. So I guess I was really looking to be reassured that there were actions going on within Manningham in their planning, so that it begins to step into and integrate with some of this work, because it's not only Manningham, it's also Banyule and where I'm located. So I'm keen on that, because all those facilities, especially local community facilities for walking and cycling and linking those various aspects of what I think is enriches our local community. I'd love to see that developed much more than what it is, and really looking at the future when the roads are done and all of that area is actually opened up to a wider audience and wider participation and enjoyment for what is in the Manningham city. And I think it's a win-win for the environment, but also for the economy of Manningham. And I guess if there is a plan or some update, I would really love to be given the opportunity to look at it, because I'd appreciate contributing if I can.
Good. Well, I look forward to that. And if there ever any positions open up on our Open Space Committee for pub, I'd encourage you to put your hand up and become an active participant in that, because I think that will also help inform our council and strategic direction in terms of open space. So,
all right. Well, thank you.
For your time. We do appreciate your feedback and interest, and we look forward to hearing from you again.
Thank you again for listening, and good night to all of you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, councillors. That's the end of the budget submissions hearing for this evening. If there are, we'll now revert to our SBS meeting, which is immediately after this. So if you would please like to leave this meeting, it's now closed, and we will join the other meeting and